Dear students, after studying this module, you shall be able to know about Alfred Adler's individual psychology, learn about an individual's uniqueness and the social dynamics, identify the role of social environment in shaping an individual's personality, evaluate the various external factors that act on an individual in contrast to Freud's unconscious determinism, and also you will be able to analyze what constitutes the personality makeup. Alfred Adler forged an image of human nature that did not describe people as affected by instinct and conflict and doomed by biological forces and childhood experiences. He called his approach individual psychology as it focused on the uniqueness of each person. Individual psychology, according to Adler, is a science that attempts to understand the experience of a behavior of each person as an organized entity. According to Adler, people are born with inferior bodies and this leads to feeling of inferiority, which serve as a main source of human striving. To Adler, the conscious, not the unconscious, was at the core of personality. Rather than being driven by instinctual forces, people are actively involved in creating themselves and directing their futures. Adlerian theory. The main tenets of his theory are as follows. The one driving force following people's behavior is striving for superiority. The subjective perception that people have is the ultimate basis for their behavior and personality. People have a unified and self-consistent personality. The people's style of life is the result of their self-consistent personality. The social interest is an innate potentiality that serves as a standard for determining the usefulness of life. An individual's style of life is formed by his or her creative power. All these tenets will be discussed in full details in the following section. The striving for superiority. The striving for superiority is the first tenet of Adlerian theory. According to him, the striving for success or superiority is the one dynamic force behind people's behavior. He holds that every individual begins life with physical deficiencies that trigger a sense of inferiority feelings. Within an individual, these inferiority feelings motivate a person to strive for superiority. Earlier, Adler believed that aggression is the driving force behind all motivation, but he soon rejected this term and defined masculine protest as the basic motive, which implied will to power or domination of others. However, soon he abandoned this term also and defined striving for superiority as the dynamic force behind all the behaviors. Adler described his notion of striving for superiority as the fundamental fact of life. Striving for superiority is not an attempt to be better than other, nor it is an inflated opinion about individual's ability and accomplishment. What he meant was the striving for superiority is innate. It is a basic urge in human compared to Freud's instinctual forces of eros and thanatos. It is continued effort toward better adaptation between man and the world. This innate goal, the drive towards superiority, is oriented towards the future and is explained in terms of future expectations. Therefore, every individual is guided by a final goal. Fictional finalism. Adler used term finalism for the idea that every individual has an ultimate goal, a final state of being and motivation to strive for it. However, the goals for which we strive are potentialities, not actualities. That is, the final goal is fictional and has no objective existence. Nevertheless, this final goal unifies an individual's personality and is a sufficient explanatory principle for anything the individual does, strives, feels and thinks. Thus, to Adler, human beings perceptually strive for the fictional ideal goal of perfection that reduces the pain of inferiority feelings. The striving force as a compensation for inferiority feeling. Adler conceived that the inferiority feelings serve as a motivating force in any behavior. To be a human being means to feel oneself inferior. He wrote, that he believed that all the humans are blessed at birth with small, weak, and inferior bodies. Throughout the life, individuals are driven by the need to overcome this sense of inferiority. This process begins in infancy. Infants are small and are totally dependent on adults. As a result, the infants develop feelings of inferiority relative to the larger, stronger people around them. They are continuously driven by the need to overcome the inferiority feelings and move towards superiority. This plus minus situation exists simultaneously and helps an individual to become a whole, as they are two dimensions of single force. Although this initial experience of inferiority feelings applies to everyone in infancy, it is not genetically determined. Rather, it is based on the role of the environment, which is same for all infants. The subjective perception. Adler's second tenet is that the person's subjective perception shape their personality and behavior. An individual striving for superiority is not based on reality, rather they are shaped by subjective perception of reality. These subjective perception of reality are the fictions or the expectations of the future. According to Adler, these fictions or future expectations are the ideas, have no existence in reality, but still they influence the people in achieving success and guide their life. An example of a fiction might be a belief that everything happens for a reason. Such a belief cannot be proved, but yet it guides the daily life of most of the people that keeps them motivated. Therefore, whether true or false, these fictions have a strong influence on people's actions, perception, or they are motivated by present perception of the future. Unity and self-consistency of personality. The third tenet of Adlerian theory is that an individual has a unified and a self-consistent personality. By this, he emphasized that each person is unique and indiscrete. There is a unity of personality and inconsistent behavior does not exist. An individual is free of conflicts and all the thoughts, feelings and behaviors are consistent with person's style of life. He acknowledges the two ways in which an individual operates in a self-consistent and unique manner. At first, influenced by his medical practice, Adler referred to organ inferiority as the source of the felt minus. Inherited inferiority intensified the normal feeling of weakness and helplessness. A child with hearing problem would feel inferior in auditory capacity. However, in a healthy adjustment, the child strives to compensate for the organ inferiority. Not everyone with organ inferiority, of course, is able to compensate for it fully. Nonetheless, the attempt to do so directs motivation. If the compensation fails, the individual may instead develop an incapacitating sense that the inferiority cannot be overcome, hence an inferiority complex. Conscious and unconscious. Another source of unified personality is the synchrony between the conscious and the unconscious. Adler identified the unconscious as a part of the goal that is neither clearly formulated nor completely understood by an individual. As soon as we understand the unconscious, it becomes conscious. Wherever we fail to understand conscious, it becomes unconscious. Therefore, a dichotomy between conscious and unconscious was avoided, and both are considered to be working together within a same unified person. Social interest. A fourth tenet of Adler theory is that the value of all human activity must be seen from the viewpoint of social interest. Adler believed that getting along with others is the first task that an individual encounters in his or her life. The person's subsequent level of the social adjustment influences his approach to all of life's problems. Adler proposed the concept of social interest, which he defined as an individual's innate potential to cooperate with other people to achieve personal and societal goals. Although we are influenced more strongly by social than biological forces, in Adler's view, the potential for social interest is innate. In that limited sense, then Adler approach has a biological element. However, an extent to which our innate potential for social interest is realized depends upon our early social experiences. Adler emphasized that community precedes the individual life. Man has always been in society, never outside of it. Social interest coincides at least partially with empathy, identification, and understanding of others, which make us capable of friendship, sympathy, and love. The ability of cooperation with others, the social interest is an innate potentiality, but in order to attain a high degree of cooperation necessary for survival, this innate potentiality must be developed far beyond its initial stage. It originates from the mother-child relationship and later on environmental forces modifies and shapes his social interest. By providing the deep care and love to the child, the mother communicates a model of caring and nurturance to the child. Furthermore, the mother's care for her husband, the child's sibling, and the other friends and relatives provide a healthy model of social interest to the child. And if the mother concentrates only on friends and relatives and not on her children or not on her husband but not friends and relatives, then the child's potential for developing social interest will be thwarted. As the result of which a child may develop an attitude towards others in which he or she may want to dominate others, use others for their personal gain, or avoid interaction with others. According to Adler, the emotional or social detachment or authoritarianism of a parent can bring about a lack of social interest in the child. Also, the relationship between the father and mother is an important model for the child. If there is marital discord, then opportunity to develop social interest in the child is missed. Forgiveness between husband and wife is an act of social interest that can lead to improved relationships. The parental relationship can affect the overall personality of a child by having an impact on romantic relationship and overall adaptation in later life. Social interest, according to Adler, is the sole criteria of human value. It is the standard for determining the usefulness of life, means of measuring psychological health. If a person has a little social interest, then that person is self-centered and will lack constructive goal. Social interest is important throughout one's entire life. At later stage of life, promoting social interest can help in developing meaningful lives, even though individual may no longer be working or raising families. The desire for superiority must be coordinated with sociability and even subordinated to it. In normal development, the striving for superiority is blended with social interest. All these actions of individual should be useful to the society in pursuing his own end. The individual is interested in others. The style of life. The fifth tenet of Adlerian theory is that the people's style of life is the result of their self-consistent personality. The style of life is defined as the person's chosen life goal and the method used to achieve them. No individual adjusts mechanically to his environment. The style of life is the expression of one individuality, for each individual sees the goal of superiority in an individual, unique way. The style of life includes an individual's goal, self-concept, feeling for others, and attitude towards the external world. The style of life controls the totality of child's behavior. All aspects of life become coordinated and subordinated to this overall plan. The style of life represents the unity of personality expressed in all aspects of the individual's life, in his conscious and unconscious, in his thinking and feeling and acting and resting, in sex and in social interest. In the first 4 or 5 years of life, the child absorbs the impact of his own body and the environment. Then the style of life begins and is the product of interaction of heredity, environment, and an individual's creative power. Adler believed that peoples with socially useful style of life represent the highest form of humanity in the process and are likely to populate the world of the future. Therefore, people who have a healthy and socially useful style of life can express their social interest through action. Now, the creative power. The final tenet is that an individual's style of life is formed by his or her creative power. For Adler, creative power is a dynamic concept that involves movement, and this movement represents the most salient characteristics of life. All psychic life involves movement towards a goal, movement with a direction. The person always manifests himself as unique, be it in thinking, feeling, speaking, or acting. Each is endowed with an individual creative power. Considered by Adler a third factor besides heredity and environment. For the creative power combines the innate potentialities and the environmental influences into a movement toward overcoming of obstacles in one's path of life. This creative power is a striving power. This creative power can be seen in different views: in the power of evolution, in the power of life, in the power which accomplished the goal of an ideal completion to overcome the difficulties of life. Typology. In 1935, Adler introduced his own typology, utilizing his concepts of degree of activity, of social interest as the two guiding principles in the group of personality types. He proposed four basic styles of life of dealing with these problems. The dominant type. This type displays a great deal of activity in pursuing his goals but lacks social interest. Their lack of consideration for others make them act in an antisocial manner. Second, the getting type. Lack of both activity and social interest and is dependent, lack consideration and initiative for others. Third is the avoiding type. Instead of struggling for success and superiority, they stand still undecided, lack activities and social interest. Fourth and the last one is the socially useful one. They cooperate with others and act in accordance with their needs. Such persons cope with problems within a well-developed framework of social interest. Birth order. One of the Adler's most enduring contribution is the idea that order of birth is a major social influence in childhood, one from which we create our style of life. Based on Adler's own experience as a middle child and based on his own clinical cases, Adler maintained that ordinal position in the family was a major determinant of the style of life. Even though siblings have the same parents and life in the same house, they do not have identical social environments. Being older or younger than one sibling and being exposed to different parental attitude create different childhood conditions that help determine personality. According to Adler, interaction among siblings in childhood have important influences on an individual. Adler emphasis on family constellation was an important and distinct contribution of Adler. He wrote about four situations. The firstborn child. At least for a while, firstborn children are in unique and inviolable situation. Firstborns typically receive their parents' instant and undivided attention. As a result, firstborn have a happy, secure existence until the secondborn child appears. They are likely to adopt the views and attitude of authority. Therefore, they are relatively power-oriented, generally responsible and predisposed toward leadership. These children are harshly disciplined, not able to take their stand, experience a traumatic dethronement when a younger sibling is born. Second-born child. Living in the shadow of the firstborn, they are likely to be especially competitive and rebellious. They are much more skeptical of authority. To some extent, their personality is shaped by his or her perception of older child's attitude toward them. They are more independent, know the art of negotiation, and know how to stand up for themselves. Typically, second child mature towards moderate competitiveness, having a healthy desire to overtake rivalry and, if receive success in mission, likely to develop a revolutionary attitude and feel that any authority can be challenged. The youngest born. Youngest or last born children never face the shock of dethronement by another child and often become the pet of the family, particularly if the sibling are more than a few years older. Driven by the need to surpass older sibling, youngest children often develop a remarkably fast rate. Last born are often high achievers in whatever work they undertake as adults. The opposite can occur, however, if the youngest children are excessively pampered and come to believe they did not to learn to do anything for themselves. As they grow older, such children may retain the helplessness and dependency of the childhood. Unaccustomed to striving and struggling, used to being cared for, these people find it difficult to adjust to adulthood. The only child. Only children never lose the position of primacy and power they hold in the family. They remain the focus and center of attention, spending more time in the company of adults than a child with siblings. Only children often mature early and manifest adult behavior and attitude. Only children are likely to experience difficulties when they find that in areas of life outside home, such as school, they are not the center of attention. Only children have learned neither to share nor to compete. If their ability do not bring them sufficient recognition and attention, they are likely to feel keenly disappointed. With this concept of birth order, he did not intend any firm rules of childhood development. Rather, he suggested the likelihood that certain style of life will develop as a function of order of birth combined with one's early social interaction. There are a lot of contradiction to this concept of birth order. The general consensus seems to be that the situation to which the child is born not only depends on his or her rank order but on the sex of the older and the younger siblings. The spread between the family members and the subjective perception of self and environment also plays an important role in the development of personality. Further research on birth order. Much research has been conducted on the effect of one birth order within the family. Obviously, being the firstborn, secondborn, lastborn, or any child influences personality in a variety of ways. Simply having older or younger sibling, regardless of one's own order of birth, can also affect personality. For example, studies of 18,876 people in England, Scotland, and Wales, and 3,432 people in the United States found that the number of older brother a man had could predict his sexual orientation. Boys who had older brother were more sexually attracted to men than were boys who did not have older brothers. The more older brothers a man had, the greater was the attraction to the same sex. Having older sister did not predict sexual orientation to women. According to Adler, firstborn are concerned with power and authority. One way for firstborn to gain power and authority as adult is through achievement in their work. If Adler was correct, then firstborn should score high on measures of achievement, an idea that has received much research support in many areas. From college attendance to high-level management, firstborns have been found to be over-representative relative to their proportion of the population. More firstborns than laterborns become eminent, and they tend to attain greater intellectual activities in academic settings and greater power and prestige in their careers. Now, summary. Adler emphasized conscious striving and the creative self in contrast to Freud's unconscious determinism. He described the fundamental motivation to strive from a felt minus to a felt plus. In his striving, a person is guided by functionalism, the image of the goal. He viewed personality as the unity. A person's unique style of life is evidenced by early memories. Although he thought of each person as a unique, Adler listed types of mistaken styles of life: ruling type, getting type, avoiding type. In contrast, healthy style of life is socially useful. Family constellation, particularly birth order, influences personality development. Social interest is the key factor in Adlerian theory.